Hey, it's Freiberger, and I'm about to show you a sample episode of a show that we do on MotorTrendOnDemand.com that's called Roadkill Extra. It shows up every single weekday. It's got stuff like outtakes from shows, behind-the-scenes stuff, tech tips, you name it. You can see them all with a free trial at MotorTrendOnDemand.com.
Cheap is good. Cheap power is even better. And a lot of times, guys want both. They want a lot of power and they want it for cheap. Now, how do you do that? Well, it's going to take some modification, but the first thing you've got to have in mind is what you're working with. Now, if you want cheap, that's generally going to mean you're working with a production engine. And some production engines are better endowed than others. An LS engine, for instance, is a very powerful engine. It's very durable. It's easily modified. But you're not going to stick an LS motor in, let's say, your Mach 1 Mustang or your Mopar. Maybe you would. But most guys would like to have an engine of the type the car originally came with, especially in a classic car application. So you're going to be constrained to certain engine families. Now, how do you make cheap power out of a cheap engine? Production-based, you've got to identify what the engine's shortcomings are. Now, this is a 318 Mopar. It was never known as a powerhouse. Most of these engines through the 70s, 80s, and 90s produced around 150 horsepower, which is really, really weak. Way back in the 60s, they were rated at 230, but they were way overrated. They never made that kind of power. Most were two-barrel induction systems. They just didn't have what it took for power. Now, let's look at the shortcomings on a stock 318. Number one, it lacked compression. Number two, it lacked airflow. And number three, it lacked camshaft. So that's a lot of stuff that you're going to have to deal with if you want to improve the power of the 318. In this case, getting more airflow at a budget price, the heads were upgraded to 360 heads or 340 heads, which have bigger ports. They flow way, way more, and they can be modified for larger valve and ported for even more power. Actually ported with large valves, this is an excellent head, even though I'm not too much of a fan of iron heads, and the combustion chamber is not as good as a contemporary aftermarket aluminum head. Number two, the intake manifold. This is nothing special. It's a two-plane manifold. It fits with the power band that this engine is going to have. It'll operate fairly well till around 6,000 RPM. So that's pretty much taking care of the airflow system. Next, the 318 had camshaft deficiency. It had a tiny cam with less than 400 lift. So that's an easy upgrade. But what are you going to use on a budget? You go right back in with what it had originally, which in this case is a hydraulic flat tappet. We simply upgraded it to a 224, 230 duration at 50, 477, 480 lift comp hydraulic flat tappet cam. Up top, all the valve train in this engine is stock, because I know that the valve train in these engines is not a deficiency. It's a shaft rocker. It's an extremely lightweight rocker, and it'll RPM like a buzzsaw. So that I left alone. The last thing is compression. Now here, you're kind of balancing two things, because the 360 heads have a much bigger combustion chamber than a 318 head. So if you just bolt the big port heads on, you're going to lose compression. So in this particular engine, we have a low-cost flat top piston from KB. But you can also get there by milling the block and the cylinder heads to reduce the volume. So compression, camshaft, and airflow. Those were the cures for this. Now, other engines may have a poor valve train, where an aftermarket rocker setup might be the answer to making that a better engine. They may have good heads from the factory, but be deficient in compression ratio. You have to identify what areas you're going to get the most bang for the buck with your particular engine. So whatever your engine type is, take the time to really think about the combination if you want to get the most for your dollar.
you need more Roadkill Extra, go sign up right now.